Several centuries after the modern age began, humans depleted nearly all the resources on the Earth.
Yeah, a few hundred years for you, and I still feel like a failure for taking a single month between reviews. Hello everyone, and after a few weeks to wrap up my web series, I'm back making reviews. This episode, Starfall! If you've been watching for a while, you may remember that I talked about this game back in 10 Hyped Creations, but couldn't get into much depth, and since I have a lot to say about this game, I decided to give it a full review, so let's get to it. The story is that humanity left Earth hundreds of years ago and are now surviving on a few specially built ships. The player follows a young optimistic boy named Skylar, his robot friend Buddy, and a jaded but well-meaning teen girl named Vanessa. Mother, the AI that runs the ships and raises the kids, brings the team together, and they venture into the dreamiverse, because this is a timeline where dreams skyrocketed in popularity and took over the entertainment industry. Okay. But as all of this goes on, Vanessa reveals that there may be something sinister going on behind the scenes of this already dark future. And that's as much as I can reveal without getting into spoilers. For the most part, the story is pretty good. Not like the best ever, but one of the better stories you'll find in Dreams. Think Ninja Cat 3. Not the most complex, but with characters you still root for, and with more than enough twists to keep your interest. That said, one of the criticisms I did have are the narrative contrivances required to justify gameplay scenarios needed for the combat segments to happen. Because the combat takes place entirely within Skylar and Vanessa's game consoles, there are multiple stretches of logic used to justify the combat-focused parts of the game, such as a room scan that just happens to be a file that you can load into Dreams complete with enemies that just happen to have attacks that can interact with the team's dream personas in the same RPG style as the rest of the game, or entering a game file so you can jump to the computer mainframe that also has antivirus software that your RPG personas can interact with. A bit weird, but I'm willing to overlook that. Also, later in the game, there is a plot line that throws ridiculous twist after ridiculous twist in your face over and over again until your perspective on the story completely shifts and a massive chunk of the game is spent getting back on track. It's not all bad, it has some great moments of character development and epic battles, but it does feel like a bit of a detour from the main plot that happens to take half the game. But again, those are minor nitpicks in an overall great package. The settings you go through are very well made for the most part. Because a good portion of the game is set in different game-within-game scenarios, you'll see everything from an enchanted swamp, a kaiju and mecha battle, and a computer mainframe. There isn't much to do here aside from run to each objective while battling enemies, but the setting and music fit the intended tone of each scene nicely. The meat of the gameplay is combat. It's a turn-based RPG where you move and then the enemy moves. Each character has a basic physical attack, Skylar has a few magic attacks, Buddy has healing spells, and Vanessa can summon creatures with either a physical or magical attack, or she can play songs that can boost damage resistance or attack power. Many enemies are weak to physical attacks and resistant to energy attacks, and vice versa, and some enemies, called mystical enemies, are resistant to both. A short while into the game, Skylar gains the ability to scan enemies to see what their weaknesses and resistance are, as well as what types of attack they'll use. So you can plan your attacks and which of Vanessa's songs you'll use to either protect your team or launch a devastating offensive. A bit later into the game, you'll also gain the ability to gain SP as your characters get hit, and when you accumulate 5 SP in one of your characters, they gain the ability to use a super move and do lots of damage. As you progress through the game, you'll gain new spells, more powerful versions of your existing spells, and new super moves that do very different things, thus offering a lot more options in combat and a lot of strategizing to do. Now, I want to take a moment to compare this system to Mac4Day's previous game, The Quest of Kadath. In this game, the setup was similar, but also much more simple. You had one shot off on each of your super moves, so you just had to fire them off and hope that that was enough. And there were no damage resistance spells, so combat, at least for me, basically boiled down to using your healing spells to survive as long as possible and deal as much damage as possible to hopefully kill all the enemies before the damage they are doing outruns your healer. In other words, combat is a dynamic endurance test since in that game you can only use Resurrect once. Vanessa's stat buffs solve this problem by giving you an additional lever of control, letting you continually adapt to the enemy's onslaught rather than inevitably approaching your own doom. So the combat system is much more refined, and while still partly reliant on chance, is a lot more involved and thus feels a lot more fair. Now, before I sign off, there's one final point I'd like to address. Starfall isn't the most visually polished creation I've showcased on my channel. Yet, I still enjoy it more than many of the dreams I've played that do have that level of polish. There's a reason for this, and that will likely take a whole video onto itself, but for the time being, I think the community, especially on YouTube, has become a bit too obsessed with short experiences with super high levels of polish. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I find that to be a short-sighted look at what Dreams has to offer. There's a reason I made the rule at the beginning of this series that I would only make a review if the creation could immerse the player for an extended period of time. I didn't want to just follow the trend of find the most cool-looking thing to stare at for 20 seconds. That's not what I look for in a creation. While some creators, like Cybersheep Film, can produce complete experiences with a high level of polish, many others start massive projects that they don't have the time to finish, or just don't want to continue, leaving the player with an incomplete experience, or just a single cool image that they will likely forget or stop caring about a few weeks later. Starfall brings you in, keeps you occupied for 8 hours, immersed in the story and combat, and leaves you with an adventure that you will remember for a long time. And I don't know about you, but I personally find that to be a lot more fulfilling. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the dreamiverse. And for next time, I've got a mountain to climb. And for once, I'm not talking about Celeste.